I had been away for 11 days when my life quietly fell apart. The business trip was supposed to be ordinary: meetings, hotel rooms, expensive dinners, and endless presentations. I called my wife, Claire, every night. She always sounded cheerful, but something about her voice had changed. She stopped asking when I was coming home. She stopped saying she missed me. When I finally landed back in the city, I imagined surprising her with flowers. Instead, when I opened the front door that evening, I found my wife sitting on the living room couch, staring at the floor with tears in her eyes. She looked up at me and whispered, "We need to talk." I dropped my suitcase beside the door. "What happened?" Claire stood slowly. Her hands were trembling. "I'm pregnant." For several seconds, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. "What?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated. My mind immediately calculated the dates. I had been away for 11 days, but the pregnancy obviously hadn't begun during that trip. Something cold settled in my stomach. "Claire, how far along?" She looked away. "That's not important. It's the only thing that matters." She began crying. "I'm sorry." Those two words told me everything. I felt something inside me snap. In a moment of rage, I slapped her. The second it happened, I froze, horrified by my own action. Claire stumbled backward and covered her cheek. Neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly at me and said something that made my blood run cold. The baby might not be his. I stared at her. "Whose?" She swallowed hard. "Daniel's." Daniel was my best friend, my closest friend, the man I had trusted with my home, my business, and my marriage. I stepped backward as if she had physically pushed me. "You're telling me you were with Daniel?" Claire said nothing. "That's not an answer." "Yes." The room suddenly felt too small. "How long?" She wiped her tears. "Before you left." My heart pounded. "How long, Claire?" She finally whispered, "Several weeks." I looked toward the hallway. Daniel had been in my house dozens of times. He had eaten at our table. He had celebrated birthdays with us. He had called Claire family. I suddenly remembered every strange moment from the past month. The late-night phone calls. The messages Claire quickly deleted whenever I entered the room. The way Daniel had insisted on helping Claire whenever I traveled. At the time, I had thought they were simply being supportive. Now every memory looked different. But then Claire said, "There's something else." I turned toward her. What could possibly be worse? She hesitated. Daniel wasn't the only man. My stomach dropped. "Who?" She closed her eyes. "Mark." I knew that name too. Mark was Claire's ex-boyfriend. The man she had dated years before we met. The man she had always insisted was completely out of her life. I couldn't breathe. "You were with your ex too?" Claire nodded. I walked toward the window, trying to understand how the woman I had married could become a stranger overnight. Then my phone vibrated. One message. From Daniel. "We need to talk before you believe everything Claire tells you." I stared at the screen. Claire noticed the message. Her face suddenly went pale. "Don't answer him," she whispered. That was when I realized something. Claire wasn't afraid of Daniel. She was afraid of what Daniel was about to tell me. I slowly looked at her. "What aren't you telling me?" She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, another message arrived. This time, there was a photograph attached. I opened it. My hands went numb. It wasn't a picture of Claire with Daniel. It was a photograph of Claire and Mark standing outside a clinic 3 weeks earlier. And beneath the photograph was one sentence. "Your wife has been lying to both of us." I looked at Claire. She was crying again. But this time, I wasn't sure whether she was crying because she was guilty or because she was terrified of what I was about to discover. I stared at the photograph until the words beneath it seemed to blur. Claire stood across from me, trembling, while my phone remained frozen in my hand. "What clinic is that?" I asked. She didn't answer. "Claire, what clinic?" Her lips began to shake. Finally, she whispered, "A fertility clinic." I felt another wave of confusion. "Why were you and Mark there?" She lowered her eyes. "Because I needed to know who the father was." My anger returned instantly. "And you couldn't tell me?" She shook her head. "I was scared." I laughed bitterly. Scared of what? Losing me? You already betrayed me. Then she said something I never expected. I wasn't there for a pregnancy test. Daniel called again. This time, I answered. His voice sounded exhausted. You need to listen carefully. Claire told you part of the truth, but not everything. I looked at my wife. She closed her eyes. Go on, I said. Daniel continued. The night before you left for your trip, Claire called me. She told me she was pregnant and asked me to meet her. My jaw tightened. And she told me the baby was mine. Claire suddenly shouted, That's not true. Daniel ignored her. I believed her at first. Then I found out she had also been seeing Mark. I stared at Claire. How did you find out? Daniel hesitated. Because Mark contacted me. Suddenly, everything became even more complicated. Daniel told me Mark had discovered something that Claire had desperately tried to hide. The pregnancy dates didn't match either man. Mark had confronted her, demanding answers. Claire had then taken both men to a fertility clinic because she wanted a paternity test as soon as possible. But there was a problem. The clinic had discovered that Claire's pregnancy wasn't the only medical issue. There was another test that had come back abnormal, and the doctor had advised her speak with her husband immediately. What test? I asked. Daniel went silent. Claire started crying. Tell him. Daniel said, Tell him what you found out. Claire finally whispered. The pregnancy test was positive, but the paternity results were inconclusive. I stared at her. Inconclusive? She nodded. The doctor said the sample couldn't establish the father yet. I couldn't understand why that mattered so much until Daniel explained the rest. There's something else you need to know, he said. Claire told me you have been trying to have children for years. My expression changed. What does that have to do with anything? Daniel answered quietly. She told me you couldn't have children. My entire body went cold. What? Claire looked at the floor. I had never been told I was infertile. We had discussed having children, but after several years of marriage and no pregnancy, Claire had always blamed stress, timing, or my work schedule. She had never once told me a doctor had found anything wrong with me. I demanded an explanation. Claire finally admitted she had secretly gone through my medical records months earlier. She had discovered an old fertility test I had taken years ago, but she had misunderstood the results. The report didn't say I was infertile. It recommended additional testing. She had convinced herself that I could never father a child. Then she began seeing Daniel. When she became pregnant, she assumed the baby had to belong to him or Mark. So you cheated because you thought I couldn't have children? I asked. She started crying. I didn't plan for this to happen. I shook my head. You didn't accidentally betray me. You made choices. For the first time, Claire had no excuse. Then Daniel said, There's one more thing. I closed my eyes. What now? The paternity test came back. Claire immediately screamed, Daniel, don't. He answered. He deserves to know. I felt my heart pounding. Whose baby is it? Silence filled the room. Then Daniel said, Neither mine nor Mark's. I looked at Claire. She was completely pale. What are you talking about? Daniel continued, The clinic contacted me because Claire listed me as an emergency contact. The preliminary results showed the baby shares genetic markers with you. I couldn't speak. Claire collapsed onto the couch. That's impossible, I whispered. Daniel said, I thought so too, but the doctor recommended that you take a proper test yourself. For the first time that night, I felt something other than anger, confusion. If the baby was mine, then Claire had been lying about something much bigger than an affair. The next morning, I went to clinic alone. The doctor sat across from me with a folder in his hands. He explained that the earlier test had been incomplete and that the only reliable way to establish paternity was through a proper DNA comparison. I signed the paperwork without saying a word. 2 days later, I received the results. I opened the envelope in my car. I read the first line. Then I read it again. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The baby was mine. I should have felt happy. Instead, I felt devastated, because now I knew Claire had cheated on me repeatedly while carrying my child. But there was another question. Why had she lied about the pregnancy? When I confronted her, she finally confessed the truth. She had been terrified that I would leave her if I discovered the affairs. She had deliberately told me the baby could belong to Daniel or Mark because she thought uncertainty would make me stay until she could repair the damage. But her plan had failed. She had destroyed the one thing she thought she could protect: our marriage. I packed my belongings that evening. Claire followed me to the front door, crying, "Please don't leave." I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not leaving because you made one mistake," I said. "I'm leaving because you kept making choices and lying every time you had the chance to tell me the truth." She begged me to stay for the baby. I told her I would never abandon my child, but I would no longer pretend to be her husband. Months later, our divorce was finalized. Daniel and I never became friends again. Mark disappeared from both our lives. Claire gave birth to a healthy baby girl. When I held my daughter for the first time, I realized something important. She hadn't betrayed me. She hadn't lied to me. She wasn't responsible for any of the choices the adults around her had made. I looked down at her tiny face and made a promise. Whatever happened between Claire, Daniel, and me would never become her burden. I would be her father. I would protect her. And I would give her the honesty I had been denied. Years later, Claire asked me whether I regretted leaving. I told her no, because losing my marriage had broken my heart. But losing myself would have destroyed my life. And sometimes the hardest ending isn't the one where you walk away from someone you love. It's the one where you finally accept that loving someone doesn't mean you have to keep letting them hurt you.